He didn't leave her suddenly. He left carefully, with promises that sounded reasonable, with silence that arrived slowly. She waited longer than she should have. Loved him quietly. And when he finally came back, she had already learned how to live without him. If you've ever had to let go of someone, not because you stopped loving them, but because you chose yourself, you're in the right place. They met in a coffee shop that wasn't special. Naomi had been going there for 3 months, always ordering the same thing, flat white, no sugar, and always sitting in the corner by the window where the afternoon light made reading easier. She worked remotely for a consulting firm in Johannesburg, which meant her mornings in Seoul started when most people were finishing lunch. The cafe was called Brew and Page, wedged between a stationery shop and a vintage clothing store in Yeonnam-dong. It had the kind of quiet that felt intentional, soft music, low conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine like punctuation. Jae-won noticed her before she noticed him. He came in during the afternoon lull, always between 2 and 3, carrying a leather messenger bag that looked expensive but worn. He ordered Americanos and sat 2 tables away, working on a laptop with the kind of focus that suggested he was solving problems that mattered. The first time they spoke, it was because she'd left her notebook on the table when she went to the restroom. He picked it up, walked over when she returned, and handed it to her without ceremony. "You left this," he said in English, his accent clear but not heavy. "Thank you." She took it, their fingers not quite touching. He nodded and returned to his seat. That was all. But the next day, when she arrived, he glanced up and gave a small nod of recognition. She returned it. The day after that, he arrived first, and when she walked in, he looked at her table, then back at her, a question in the gesture. She sat down. He went back to his work. It became a pattern before it became anything else. A week later, the cafe's Wi-Fi went down. Naomi had been in the middle of uploading a presentation when her screen froze. She refreshed. Nothing. Looked around. The barista was resetting the router behind the counter. Jae-won glanced up from his screen. "It does this sometimes. Takes about 10 minutes. Good to know," she said. "You can tether to my hotspot if it's urgent." He said it casually, already pulling out his phone. "I don't want to use your data. I have unlimited." "It's fine." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." He told her the password, something random, numbers and letters, and went back to his work. She connected, finished her upload, and 10 minutes later, when the cafe Wi-Fi returned, she disconnected without comment. But the next day, when she sat down, he looked up and said, "Everything upload okay?" It did. "Thank you again." "No problem." It was a small exchange. Forgettable, even. But it marked a shift. They were no longer just 2 people who happened to occupy the same space. They were 2 people who'd acknowledged a need and met it without fanfare. The conversations grew from there. Not every day. Not intrusively. Just small bridges built across the silence. One afternoon, she was reading a book, fiction, something she'd picked up at the airport, and he glanced over. "Is it good?" She looked up. "It's fine." A little slow. "What's it about?" "A woman trying to figure out whether she's running towards something or away from it." He smiled slightly. "That sounds like most books. Most lives, too." He considered that, nodded. "True." She marked her page. "Do you read much?" "Not fiction. Mostly theory. Architecture, design. Sometimes philosophy if I'm feeling pretentious." "That doesn't sound pretentious." "It does when you say it out loud at a coffee shop." She laughed, actually laughed, and he looked pleased, like he'd won something small. After that, the exchanges became more frequent. She learned he was designing a cultural center in Gangnam, that he'd lived abroad for several years, that he took his coffee black because adding milk felt like a commitment he wasn't ready for. "That's a strange way to think about coffee," she said. "I'm a strange person." "I don't think you are. You don't know me yet." The yet hung in the air between them, full of possibility neither of them named. 2 weeks passed before they had their first real conversation. The cafe was more crowded than usual, and the only available seat was at his table. He saw her scanning the room and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "If you don't mind," he said. "I don't." They worked in silence for an hour. Then he closed his laptop and looked at her. "You're not from here." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Nairobi, originally. Living in Johannesburg now." "You?" "Seoul. Always." "And the bag?" He glanced at it, surprised. "What about it?" "It's seen more than just Seoul." A small smile. "Berlin. London. 2 years in Singapore. Corporate. Architecture. You? Strategy consulting." Which mostly means telling companies things they already know but won't admit. The smile widened slightly. "That sounds frustrating." "It pays well. That's usually how it works." They returned to their work, but something had shifted. The silence was no longer just absence of noise. It was companionable. Safe. Over the next month, the afternoons at the cafe became the fixed point in Naomi's day. Everything else could shift: meetings, deadlines, the minor crises that came with consulting work, but at 2:30, she'd close her laptop, walk the 15 minutes to Brew and Page, and find him already there or arriving just after her, and the world would quiet. She learned things slowly. That he'd grown up in Busan but moved to Seoul for university. That his father had wanted him to be a doctor, that he'd disappointed his family by choosing design instead, that he carried that disappointment carefully, like something fragile that might break if handled wrong. She told him about Nairobi. About her mother's garden and her father's terrible jokes. About how she'd left because she wanted to see what else was possible, and how sometimes she missed home so much it felt physical. "Do you regret leaving?" he asked one afternoon. "No. But I regret that leaving was necessary." He understood that. She could see it in the way he nodded, in the silence that followed. One day it rained. Not the soft, polite rain of spring, but the heavy, insistent rain of late autumn that turned streets into mirrors. Naomi had forgotten her umbrella. When she stood to leave, Jae-won looked out the window, then at her. "Wait," he said. He pulled an umbrella from his bag, black, compact, the kind that fit in a briefcase, and handed it to her. "I can't take your umbrella," she said. "I have another one at home." "Take it." "What about you?" "I'll wait it out. I'm in no hurry." She looked at him, trying to read what was underneath the offer. But his expression was neutral, kind, unreadable. "Thank you," she said. "Bring it back tomorrow." It was a small thing. An umbrella. But the next day, when she returned it, he smiled like she'd kept a promise that mattered. "You didn't have to rush back," he said. "I don't like owing people." "It's not a debt." Still. He took the umbrella, set it beside his chair, and they didn't talk about it again. But something had shifted. They were building a vocabulary of small gestures, a language made of coffee and Wi-Fi passwords and borrowed umbrellas. The first time they met outside the cafe, it was his idea. "There's an exhibit opening tomorrow night," he said one afternoon, casual, like he was commenting on the weather. "Contemporary architecture. It's not exciting, but it's not terrible either. If you're free." She looked at him. "Are you inviting me?" "I'm suggesting an option." "That's very carefully phrased." "I'm a careful person." She smiled. "What time?" 7. "I can meet you there, or I'll meet you there." He nodded, gave her the address, and left. She sat there for another 10 minutes, staring at her screen, trying to decide what had just happened. The exhibit was in Itaewon, a small gallery tucked between a bookstore and a wine bar. When Naomi arrived, Jae-won was already inside, standing in front of a model of a residential complex, hands in his pockets, studying it with the same focus he brought to his laptop. "You're early," she said. "I'm always early." He turned. "You look nice." "Thank you." She'd changed 3 times before leaving her apartment, finally settling on something simple: dark jeans, a cream sweater, boots. Nothing too formal, nothing too casual. She'd told herself it didn't matter, that this wasn't a date, that they were just 2 people with shared interests. But she'd still changed 3 times. They moved through the gallery slowly, stopping at models and renderings, reading plaques. Jae-won explained things without being condescending, why certain materials were chosen, how light and space could change the way a building felt, why some designs succeeded and others failed despite looking similar. She listened, asked questions, watched the way he came alive when he talked about design. There was a precision to the way he thought, a carefulness that extended beyond his work into how he spoke, how he moved, how he existed in the world. "Do you always think this hard about buildings?" she asked. "I think this hard about everything." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." "Then why do it?" He considered. "Because if I don't, I make mistakes. And mistakes in my work last longer than I do." "That's a lot of pressure." "Yes." "Do you ever let yourself off the hook?" He looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Not often." She wanted to ask why. Wanted to push past the careful phrasing into something more honest. But he'd already turned back to the exhibit, and the moment passed. Afterward, they went to the wine bar next door. It was small, warm, filled with the low hum of other conversations. They sat at the bar, ordered glasses of red wine that cost more than Naomi usually spent, and talked about nothing important: travel, food, the strangeness of living in a place that wasn't home. "Do you miss Nairobi?" he asked. "Sometimes. Mostly I miss the people. My family. My friends. The way everything feels less curated." Curated? Seoul feels designed. Like someone planned every corner. Nairobi is chaotic, but it's real. You can see the seams. "I like seams," he said. "Then you should visit." "Maybe I will." The words hung between them, tentative and non-committal. She waited for him to say more, to make a plan, to suggest a timeline, to turn maybe into something concrete. But he didn't. He took another sip of wine and changed the subject, asking about her work, and she followed his lead, even though part of her wanted to press. When they left, he walked her to the subway station. They stood on the platform, waiting for her train, the silence stretching between them like something physical. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "Thank you for coming. We should do this again." He looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "We should." The train arrived. She stepped on, turned back, and saw him still standing there, watching. He raised a hand. She did the same. The doors closed. On the ride home, she replayed the evening in her mind, looking for clues. The way he'd smiled when she arrived. The way he'd leaned in slightly when she spoke. The way he'd said, "We should," instead of "maybe." She told herself she was reading too much into it. That he was just being kind. That she shouldn't mistake politeness for interest. But she also couldn't shake the feeling that something had started, even if neither of them had named it yet. Over the next 2 months, they saw each other often. Not every day, but regularly enough that it felt like something. They went to more exhibits, tried restaurants she would never have found on her own, walked through neighborhoods he knew by heart. He was good company, thoughtful, observant, easy to be around. But he never called it a date. Never reached for her hand. Never kissed her goodnight. There were moments when it seemed like he might. A pause that lasted too long. A look that felt like a question. Once, after dinner, they were standing outside her building and he'd stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something clean and understated, and she'd thought, "This is it. He's going to say something." But then his phone had buzzed. He glanced at it, apologized, stepped back. The moment passed. Naomi didn't push. She told herself she was being patient, that he was just careful, that some people moved slower. But underneath, she was aware of the imbalance. She was leaning in. He was holding still. She started noticing small things. The way he changed the subject when conversations got too personal. The way he framed everything in provisional language, "Maybe, we'll see, let's not rush." The way he never made plans more than a few days in advance, like he was afraid of committing to a future that might not happen. One evening, after they'd seen a film, something quiet and European that neither of them had loved, they stopped for coffee at a place near her apartment. It was late, almost 10, and the cafe was nearly empty. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Do you do this with other people?" He looked confused. "Do what?" "This. Spend time with them. Go to exhibits and dinners and movies." "Not really." "I'm not. I don't have a lot of close friends here." "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee even though he took it black. "I'm not good at letting people in." "You let me in." "Did I?" The question hung between them, and she realized he wasn't being coy. He genuinely didn't know. I think so, she said carefully. Or maybe I just convinced myself you did. He looked at her, something close to guilt crossing his face. I like spending time with you. I want you to know that. But I don't want you to expect something I'm not sure I can give. What do you think I'm expecting? I don't know. Clarity, maybe? Certainty. And you can't give that? Not right now. She absorbed that, trying to keep her expression neutral. Because of timing? Or because of me? Neither. Both. He set down his cup. I'm not good at this. At relationships. At letting someone matter. Why? Because when people matter, they can hurt you. And I've been hurt enough. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. And it made her chest tighten because she understood it. Understood the fear underneath the carefulness. But understanding didn't make it easier. I'm not trying to hurt you, she said quietly. I know. But you could. Just by leaving. I'm leaving in 3 months regardless. My contract ends. Exactly. She looked at him, at the way he was holding himself, shoulders tight, jaw set, like he was bracing for something. So this is temporary by default. I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm saying I don't know how to want something and trust it at the same time. She wanted to tell him that trust was a choice, that fear was just fear, that if he wanted something, he should reach for it instead of protecting himself from it. But she also knew that wasn't fair. People healed at their own pace, carried their damage in their own ways. Okay, she said finally. Okay, I understand. I don't agree, but I understand. He looked relieved. And that, more than anything, told her where they stood. They finished their coffee in silence. When he walked her to her building, he said goodnight the same way he always did, polite, warm, careful. She went upstairs and sat on her bed, staring at her phone, trying to decide if she should text him. Trying to decide if waiting was patience or self-betrayal. She didn't text him. And when they met at the cafe 2 days later, they acted like the conversation hadn't happened. But something had changed. She could feel it in the pauses, in the way he smiled just a little less easily, in the way she measured her words more carefully, afraid of asking for too much. She was waiting for something he wasn't ready to give. And he was hoping time would make the question unnecessary. Stories like this aren't about villains or heroes. They're about moments we recognize but rarely talk about. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, you might want to stay here a while. One afternoon, 3 weeks before her contract was set to end, Naomi asked him about Berlin. They were at the cafe, in their usual spot, and she'd been thinking about it all week, how to bring it up, whether to bring it up, what she even wanted him to say. You lived there for 2 years, right? She said, trying to sound casual. Yes. Why? What was it like? He looked up from his laptop, cautious. Cold. Efficient. Good for work. Did you like it? I respected it. That's not the same thing. No. But it's honest. She nodded, looked back at her screen. Then, before she could stop herself, she asked, would you go back? He was quiet. Too quiet. Why are you asking? Just curious. Naomi. She looked at him. I'm just wondering if you ever think about leaving again. Going somewhere new. I think about it sometimes. And I don't know. It depends. On what? He closed his laptop slowly, deliberately. Are you asking if I'd leave Seoul? Or if I'd leave you? The directness surprised her. I don't know. Both, maybe. If I got an offer I couldn't turn down, I'd take it. That's always been true. Even now. Even now. She felt something settle in her chest, not quite disappointment, not quite surprise. Just confirmation of something she'd already known. Okay, she said. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to know. He looked at her like he was trying to read something underneath the words. I'm not trying to hurt you. I know. But I'm also not going to lie and say I'd stay if the right opportunity came. I'm not asking you to. Aren't you? She held his gaze. No. I'm asking you to be honest. And you are. So, thank you. He looked unconvinced, but he didn't push. Just nodded and opened his laptop again. They worked in silence for the rest of the afternoon. But the question hung between them, unanswered and heavy. That night, Naomi lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to untangle what she felt. She wasn't angry. She didn't feel betrayed. But she also felt something shifting, a slow, quiet recognition that she'd been waiting for him to choose her, and he'd been waiting for circumstances to make the choice unnecessary. Neither of them was wrong. But they also weren't aligned. And she was starting to understand that misalignment, left alone, didn't resolve itself. It just calcified. 3 weeks before Naomi's contract was set to end, Jae-won told her about the job. They were at the cafe, in their usual spot, when he mentioned it casually, like it wasn't the kind of news that changed everything. "I got an offer," he said. "A firm in Berlin. They want me to lead a project, mixed-use development, 3-year timeline." She looked up from her laptop. "That's big." "It is. When do they need an answer?" "I already gave it. I'm leaving in 6 weeks." She felt something shift in her chest. Not quite pain, not quite surprise. Just the quiet recognition of inevitability. "Congratulations," she said. "Thank you. You'll be great." He nodded, looked at his screen, then back at her. "I wanted to tell you earlier, but I wasn't sure how." "It's fine. It's your career. It's exciting." "It is," he agreed. But he didn't sound excited. She wanted to ask him what he was feeling. Wanted to ask if he'd thought about her when he accepted. Wanted to ask if this changed anything between them, or if there had never been anything solid enough to change. But she didn't. Because she already knew the answers. They worked in silence for the rest of the afternoon. When they left, he walked her to the subway, just like always. "We'll still see each other before you go," he said. "Both of us, I mean. Before we both go." "Of course." But the remaining weeks felt different. They still met at the cafe, still had dinners, still talked. But there was an awareness now, a countdown neither of them acknowledged directly. Naomi found herself memorizing things. The way he held his coffee cup. The way he tilted his head when he was thinking. The way he said her name, soft, careful, like it was something breakable. She told herself she was being dramatic. That they were friends, that this was normal, that she'd see him again someday. But she also knew she was lying to herself. One night, a week before her flight, they had dinner at a quiet restaurant in Samcheong-dong. The food was beautiful, the conversation easy, but everything felt like it was wrapped in glass, fragile and untouchable. "Are you excited to go home?" he asked. "I think so. It'll be strange, though. I've gotten used to it here. Seoul has that effect." "It's not just Seoul." He looked at her, and for a moment, she thought he might say something real. Something that mattered. But then he looked down at his plate and said, "You'll do well. Wherever you go, so will you." They finished dinner in near silence. When it ended, he walked her back to her apartment. They stood outside the building, the street quiet, the night air cool. "Thank you," she said. "For the last 6 months. For all of it. I should be thanking you." "For what?" "For making this place feel less lonely." She looked at him, waiting for more. Waiting for him to say something that would make this easier, or harder, or just different. But he just smiled, a little sadly, and said, "Safe flight." She nodded. "Good luck in Berlin." He hesitated, like he was deciding something. Then he leaned in and hugged her, brief, careful, restrained. When he pulled back, he didn't meet her eyes. "Take care, Naomi." "You too." He walked away. She went inside. That was how it ended. Not with a fight. Not with a confession. Just with a goodbye that felt like a door closing softly. For the first month after she left, they stayed in touch. Text messages mostly. Short updates about work, about adjusting to new routines. He sent her photos of Berlin, gray skies, old buildings, half-finished construction sites. She sent him pictures of Johannesburg, jacaranda trees, her favorite coffee shop, her parents' garden. But the messages started coming slower. His replies took longer. Her questions went unanswered. She told herself he was busy. Told herself long-distance friendships, or whatever this was, required patience. But she also started noticing the space where his presence used to be. She'd see something that reminded her of him and reach for her phone, then stop, realizing she didn't want to be the one always initiating. She'd draft messages and delete them, rewriting them 3 or 4 times before giving up entirely. She'd check his social media and see evidence of a life that was moving forward without her: dinners with new colleagues, site visits, photos of Berlin at night. He looked happy. Or at least, he looked fine. And she wasn't sure which hurt more. 2 months after she'd left Seoul, she was having coffee with a friend in Johannesburg, someone who'd known her for years, who could read her silences. "You're still thinking about him," her friend said. "I'm not." "You are. I can tell." Naomi stirred her coffee, not looking up. "It doesn't matter." "Of course it matters. You spent 6 months with him. We were friends. You were more than that." He didn't think so. Her friend leaned back, studying her. "Did you ever tell him how you felt?" "I didn't need to. He knew." "Maybe. But knowing and hearing are different things." Naomi thought about that. Thought about all the conversations they'd had, all the things she'd almost said but hadn't. It wouldn't have changed anything. Maybe not. But at least you'd know you tried. That night, Naomi sat on her balcony, staring at her phone. She opened the message thread with Jae-won, scrolled through the slow decay of their communication, her long messages shortening, his responses growing more perfunctory, the gaps between texts widening like something inevitable. She started typing. "I miss you. I don't know what we were, but I miss it. And I think you do too, even if you won't say it. I'm not asking you to come back or to change or to be something you're not. I just wanted you to know that what we had mattered to me. And I think it mattered to you too." She read it 3 times. Her thumb hovered over the send button. Then she deleted it. Because her friend was wrong. Knowing and hearing weren't different. They were the same. And if he'd wanted to hear it, he would have asked. She put her phone down and looked out at the city, the lights, the noise, the evidence of life continuing whether she was ready or not. She didn't send anything that night. Or the next. And when he finally texted her a week later, something casual, something meaningless about a building he thought she'd find interesting, she replied politely and left it at that. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was just complete. She stopped checking his profile. Stopped drafting messages. Stopped waiting. 3 months after returning to Johannesburg, Naomi started seeing a therapist. Not because she was falling apart. Not because she couldn't function, but because she'd noticed a pattern, and she wanted to understand it before she repeated it. The therapist's office was in Rosebank, in a building with too many plants and motivational posters that tried too hard. But the therapist herself, Dr. Lena Okonkwo, was sharp, direct, and didn't waste time with platitudes. "Tell me about Seoul," Dr. Okonkwo said in their 3rd session. Naomi told her. About the cafe. About Jae-won. About waiting for something that never arrived. "And you never told him how you felt?" "He knew." "Did he? Or did you assume he knew because you thought it was obvious?" Naomi was quiet. "Here's what I'm hearing," Dr. Okonkwo continued. "You met someone emotionally unavailable. You recognized it early. But instead of protecting yourself, you waited for him to become available. And when he didn't, you blamed yourself for expecting too much." "I didn't blame myself." "Didn't you?" Naomi looked out the window. "I just thought, if I was patient enough, if I didn't push, if I let him move at his own pace, he'd choose you." "Yes, but he didn't." "No. And now you're here, trying to figure out why." Naomi nodded. Dr. Okonkwo leaned forward. "The answer isn't complicated. He didn't choose you because he wasn't ready to choose anyone. And that's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of his capacity. I know that intellectually. But you don't feel it." "No." "Then let's work on that." Over the next 6 months, Naomi learned things about herself she hadn't wanted to see. That she equated patience with love. That she mistook emotional restraint for depth. That she'd built a version of Jae-won in her mind that was more complete than the man he'd actually been. She wasn't angry at him. She didn't think he'd used her, or lied, or manipulated. He'd been honest about his limitations. She'd just chosen not to believe him. "That's the part that hurts," she told Dr. Okonkwo one afternoon. "Not that he didn't love me, but that I ignored all the signs because I wanted it to be different. And now I'm trying to trust the signs." She started dating again. Small things, coffee, dinners, nothing serious. One man, a lawyer named Tabo, lasted 3 months. He was kind, emotionally available, interested. But when he started talking about the future, she panicked and ended it. Why? Dr. Okonkwo asked. Because I didn't feel it. Feel what? The thing I felt with Jae-won. And what was that? Naomi thought about it. Possibility. Or uncertainty? She stopped. What? Sometimes we mistake uncertainty for chemistry. The not knowing feels like excitement. But it's just anxiety dressed up as romance. Naomi sat with that for a long time. What if it was both, she said finally. What if there was real chemistry, but also real incompatibility? Then you accept both. And you stop trying to make one cancel out the other. That night, Naomi went home and deleted Jae-won's number from her phone. Not out of anger. Not out of hurt. Just out of recognition that holding on to it was holding on to something that no longer existed. She didn't block him. Didn't unfollow him. Just removed the easy access. And slowly, carefully, she started building a life that felt like hers. She got promoted. Senior consultant. More travel, more responsibility, more money. She bought a small house in Melville with a garden and a view. She spent more time with her family. Started running in the mornings. Took a pottery class and discovered she was terrible at it, but didn't care. She built routines that didn't require anyone else's participation. Built friendships that felt solid. Built a version of herself that didn't define happiness by whether someone else chose her. And one day, almost 2 years after leaving Seoul, she realized she'd gone an entire week without thinking about him. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't closure. It was just absence. The hurt had become background noise. Still there, if she listened for it. But no longer the loudest thing in the room. 2 years and 4 months after Naomi left Seoul, her company sent her back. A new contract, a different client, but the same city. She'd hesitated when they offered it, unsure if returning was wise. But the project was good, the pay better, and she'd convinced herself enough time had passed. Seoul felt different now. Or maybe she did. She didn't go back to Brew and Page. Didn't walk through Yeonnam-dong or Samcheong-dong or any of the neighborhoods they'd explored together. She stayed in Gangnam, created new routines, found new cafes, met new people. She was fine. Until she saw him. It was at a networking event her client insisted she attend. Some industry mixer in a sleek hotel ballroom, all glass and steel, and people pretending to care about conversations they'd forget by morning. Naomi had been nursing a glass of wine, half listening to a conversation about market trends, when she saw him across the room. Jae-won. He looked the same. A little older, maybe. Hair slightly shorter. Same careful posture, same quiet presence. Her first instinct was to leave. But he'd already seen her. He crossed the room, moving through the crowd with that same deliberate calm. When he reached her, he stopped, hands in his pockets, and gave a small, uncertain smile. Naomi. Jae-won. I didn't know you were back. I didn't advertise it. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. How long? 2 months. You. I got back 6 weeks ago. The Berlin project finished early. Congratulations. Thank you. They stood there, the noise of the event continuing around them, neither quite sure what to say next. She studied him. He looked tired. Not unhappy, but worn in a way she didn't remember. Like the last 2 years had cost him something he hadn't expected to pay. You look well, he said finally. So do you. Are you? Would you want to get coffee? Catch up. Every instinct told her to say no. To protect the distance she'd worked so hard to create. To keep the version of him that existed in her memory separate from the man standing in front of her. But part of her, small, stubborn, still curious, wanted to know what he'd say. Sure, she said. Tomorrow? 3 o'clock. I'll text you a place. Okay. He smiled, relieved. It's good to see you. She didn't return the sentiment. Just nodded. He left, and she stood there, feeling the weight of the past 2 years settle back onto her shoulders. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide if she'd made a mistake. The next day, he texted her an address. Not Brew and Page. Somewhere new. Neutral ground. She arrived on time. He was already there, sitting by the window, 2 cups of coffee on the table. I ordered for you, he said. Flat white, no sugar. Unless that's changed. It hasn't. She sat down. The silence stretched. So, he said. Berlin. How was it? Good. Hard. Rewarding. I learned a lot. That's good. And Johannesburg? How's work? Busy. I got promoted last year. Senior consultant now. That's great. You deserve it. Thank you. More silence. She sipped her coffee, watching him. He looked uncomfortable, like he was trying to find a script and couldn't. I'm glad you're back, he said finally. Are you? He looked at her, surprised by the directness. Yes. Why? Because I missed you. The words sat between them, too heavy to ignore. You have a strange way of showing that, she said quietly. I know. You stopped replying. You disappeared. I know. And now you want to catch up, like none of that mattered? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I was afraid. Of what? Of hurting you. Of promising something I couldn't deliver. Of being too far away to do it right. He paused. So I pulled back. And I told myself it was better that way. For who? For you. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's convenient. I know it sounds like an excuse. It is an excuse. He looked down at his coffee. You're right. I waited for you, Jae-won. I waited longer than I should have. And you let me. I'm sorry. I don't need an apology. I just need you to understand that I'm not the same person I was when I left. He looked up. I can see that. Can you? Yes. You're stronger. More certain. I had to be. He nodded slowly. I understand. Do you? I think so. She leaned back, studying him. Why did you want to see me? Because when I saw you yesterday, I realized how much I'd regretted not trying. Not being brave enough. And now? Now I'm trying. She felt something tighten in her chest. Part of her, small, stubborn, still hurting, wanted to let him. Wanted to believe that timing could be fixed, that they could rewind and try again. But the larger part, the part that had survived his silence, knew better. I can't do this, she said quietly. Do what? This. Whatever this is. I spent 2 years letting go of you. I'm not going to undo that because you're back and feeling nostalgic. It's not nostalgia. Then what is it? It's. He searched for words. Regret. Hope. The feeling that I let something important slip away because I was too afraid to hold on. She looked at him for a long moment. That's honest. I'm trying to be. But it doesn't change anything. He was quiet. Then, softly, doesn't it? No. She shook her head. Because you're still the same person who couldn't commit. Who chose distance over risk. And I'm the person who learned not to wait. People change. Do they? He didn't answer. She finished her coffee and stood. Thank you for this. For being honest. But I think it's better if we don't do this again. Naomi. I'm not angry, Jae-won. I promise. But I can't go back to that place. I can't be the person who waits while you decide if I'm worth the risk. He stood too, looking at her with something that might have been desperation if he'd let it show. What if I'm sure now? Then I'm happy for you. But I'm not the person you get to be sure about. Not anymore. She picked up her bag. He didn't try to stop her. At the door, she turned back. I hope you find what you're looking for. I really do. Then she left. She didn't cry on the subway. Didn't call her friends. Didn't text him later to soften the blow. She just went home, made dinner, and sat on her balcony, watching the city lights. And she felt sad. But she also felt certain. The certainty, she'd learned, mattered more. 2 weeks later, she saw him one more time. It was unplanned. She was walking through Insadong on a Saturday afternoon, browsing art shops, when she turned a corner, and there he was, standing outside a gallery, looking at his phone. He glanced up. Saw her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he walked over, slow and careful, stopping a respectful distance away. Hi, he said. Hi. How are you? I'm good. You? I'm managing. She nodded. They stood there, the street busy around them, 2 people who used to matter to each other and didn't quite know how to stop. I've been thinking about what you said, he told her. About not being able to go back. And? You were right. I can't ask you to. She looked at him, surprised by the resignation in his voice. But I want you to know, he continued, that I understand now. What I lost. What I was too afraid to hold on to. And I'm sorry I didn't figure it out sooner. I appreciate that. I know it doesn't change anything. No. But it's still worth saying. He gave a small, sad smile. You were one of the best things that happened to me in Seoul. I just want you to know that. You were important to me too. Past tense. Past tense, she confirmed gently. He nodded, like he'd expected it but needed to hear it anyway. Take care of yourself, Naomi. You too. He turned and walked away. She watched him go, feeling the finality of it settle over her like a blanket, heavy, but not suffocating. She didn't regret the time they'd spent together. Didn't regret the waiting, even though it had hurt. Because it had taught her something important. That love, alone, wasn't enough. That timing mattered. That choosing herself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. She turned and walked in the opposite direction, back toward her neighborhood, back toward her life. And for the first time in years, she didn't look back. Months passed. Her contract in Seoul ended. She returned to Johannesburg with a promotion and an offer to lead a new division. She took it. She dated someone new, a professor named David who taught political science and made her laugh and didn't need 2 years to decide if she was worth showing up for. It didn't last, but it was good while it did. And when it ended, she was fine. She stopped checking Jae-won's social media. Stopped wondering if he thought about her. Stopped trying to make sense of something that simply hadn't worked. She built a life that felt like hers. Full of work she cared about, people who showed up, routines that brought her peace. And sometimes, late at night, when she was alone and the world was quiet, she'd think about him. About the afternoons in the cafe, the walks through Seoul, the way he used to look at her like he was on the edge of something he couldn't name. She didn't regret letting him go. But she understood, finally, what it meant to love someone and still choose yourself. That wasn't failure. It was growth. And growth, she'd learned, didn't always feel good. But it always mattered. Years later, a friend would ask her if she ever wondered what would have happened if the timing had been different. And she'd smile and say, sometimes. But not in a way that hurts anymore. Because the truth was, she didn't need to know. Some stories didn't end with closure. Some ended with acceptance. And that, she'd learned, was enough. She learned to hold her own peace. To recognize when waiting was patience and when it was self-abandonment. To know the difference between a man who was careful and a man who was afraid. She'd learned that love could be real and still not be right. That someone could matter deeply and still not be meant for you. That you could do everything correctly, be patient, be kind, be open, and still not get the ending you wanted. But you could survive it. And on the other side of survival was something quieter, steadier, more solid than the thing you'd lost. She carried him with her, not as a wound, but as evidence. Evidence that she'd been brave enough to want something. Brave enough to wait. And, eventually, brave enough to let go. That was the part she was most proud of. Not the love. Not the waiting. The letting go. Some love stories don't end with closure. They end with understanding. If this story stayed with you, AFROSEOUL Hearts is where the rest of them live.